Buenas and Havade, the Committee on Infrastructure, Economic Development, Simon Sanchez High School, Disability Service, Self-Determination, and Historic Preservation, Housing, Public Accountability, and the Guam Build-Out Informational Briefing is called to order. The time is currently 10:04 a.m. on Wednesday, April 17, 2024. Notice of this hearing was provided to all senators, stakeholders, and the local media April 10, 2024, and April 15, 2024, thus meeting the requirements for the Open Government Law. In addition, the notice of this hearing was also posted and available on the Guam Legislature's website. Materials for this informational hearing were shared on the committee drive and are available for printing upon request. Recording of today's hearing will be available online via Guam Legislature's media on YouTube. For signing convenience, please scan QR code displayed at the entryway of the public hearing room or the input browser bit.ly/RABQ_SIGININ. Joining me, I would like to acknowledge my colleague, Senator Joe San Augustine, Sijus Masi, for your presence. Before we start, I'd just like to provide some general rules of conduct for those in attendance. The conduct of this hearing shall be as follows. Individuals speaking shall only use respectful and professional language and conduct. Personal interference about the character or motive of any senator or any individual is not permitted. The chairperson on the committee may order removal of the hearing from the committee or subcommittee of any person who is not a member of the Lias Guahan and who fails to observe proper decorum. According to the 37th Guam Legislature Standing Rules, all must abide by these rules of conduct and quality assurance standards. Before speaking, please introduce yourself, stating your name, job title, and organization you may be representing, or self. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. So today we're here for an important meeting with one clear purpose: to find practical solutions that will help renters in Guam, especially those who currently don't have enough support from existing aid programs or subsidies. We're at a critical point where working together and sharing ideas could really change things for the better in our community. Today's agenda is all about understanding the problems of renters face and figuring out real ways to help them. I'm glad you are here because your knowledge and viewpoints and stories are crucial for finding fair and effective solutions. I believe that by working together, we can create policies that meet immediate needs and ensure a stable, prosperous future for everyone in Guam. Thanks for being a part of this vital effort. What we discuss today and we will decide today will play a big role in improving the housing assistance in our community and making it more inclusive and reachable for those who need it. In preparation for this briefing, my office sent topics of discussion to the agency representatives and parties. I encourage everyone to share their thoughts and the ideas so that we can all benefit from each other's experiences. I appreciate your participation in this informational briefing and look forward to a collaborative and productive discussion. Let's begin with the item on agenda, renters assistance. So you guys want to introduce yourself real quickly and then before we start the questioning?
Hi, I'm Neat Munia with Guam Association of Realtors. I am the current president.
Thank you.
Hafaden, good morning. Fabian Respicio, member of the Legislative Committee, Guam Association of Realtors.
I'm Chris Felix, president of Century 21 Realty Management and a member of the, I think it's now Government Affairs Committee. We just changed the name, so we're a little lost, but I think that's it.
All good, all good. Thank you so much for being present today. So first, the committee is keen to investigate policy solutions that support renters who currently lack assistance or do not meet the criteria for renters aid programs or subsidies. How can we extend aid to those renters?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to speak also on behalf of Liz Duenas, who is also a member of our committee, and REMAX. It hurts to say it, but she's a member of REMAX.
Noted. You may
and
proceed.
A good friend. Her first response to that is currently Guam offers Section 8 subsidy and rental assistance. Section 8 offers 1 year minimum rent with consistent payments from the government to landlords every month. Emergency program assistance is for 18 months, but with a limit of 3 months at a time, with tenants resubmitting for payment, which may be taken a while for payment processing. The problem is when the subsidy runs out, the landlord would be stuck with having either to evict the tenant or go to court. Key elements is to create some form of government housing or tax credit given to landlords as an incentive. Guam Housing has an inventory of properties that could be used for this purpose, or obtaining a federal grant to purchase or build apartment buildings specifically for this purpose to help with the those unable to get subsidies. That's Liz Dueña says, I'm in basic agreement with her very much. The problem with offering tax credits we see in offering tax credits to the tenant is they probably will have a hard time using it. The tenants we want to reach, that you're trying to reach, Senator, are the ones who probably could not use a tax credit. But if we could structure a tax credit to be given to the tenant via the landlord, where the landlord could use that form of tax credit, such as a reduction in GRT, a reduction in property tax, without touching income tax, some other tax that the landlord would normally pay, some sort of credit in those areas. There's also a law now that if your building is over $1 million, your property tax doubles, maybe offering some sort of reduction on that. Those are just ideas, but if it could be offered through the landlord. The other important thing is that the tax credit be somehow given through the tenant, but given to the landlord. We've had problems with some of these rental assistance programs that were given to the tenant, and the landlord doesn't get it. And then the landlord has to go in for eviction, and the whole purpose of the credits just fall apart. And it doesn't help the tenant, and it sure doesn't help the landlord. But somehow tie it in where the landlord's name is given on some sort of credit. That's the answer to that section. Thank you, Senator.
I just wanted to expand a little bit on what Chris Felix and Liz Duenas had already pointed out with regard to the ERA program. It's a very good program. I think that it just needs to be revisited, and as Chris mentioned, the money should be going directly to the landlord so that we know that the payments are covered. And furthermore, it puts a lot of burden on the renter to resubmit documentation every 3 months. Realistically, a lot of people's financial situation doesn't change in 3 months. If they could revisit that process and expand it from 3 months to 1 year, like GURA, give them a chance to get on their feet. Give them a chance to have some stability. After 12 months, then they can revisit and resubmit documentation. I think that it's a very good program. There's just a lot of loopholes for the tenant to go through. And then on the landlord side, a lot of landlords are frustrated with that program. They want to help these renters, but because the monies are not being received directly from them, they have the burden now of chasing. They've approved for this program, but now we have the burden, those landlords have the burden of chasing down those funds. So if they can somehow streamline that program and, talk to the Section 8 people at GURA, and if they can use some of those parameters, I think that the program will work a little bit more nicely for everyone involved.
Anyone else?
Our GARP president here. Chris and Fabe really said pretty much everything, but if we're going to do incentives, I totally agree. It's going to be to the landlord, the property owner. I remember a comment from one of these people one time during the pandemic where the renter was allowed to forego paying the landlord for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then they were legally obligated to catch up at some point. So we would go out to collect rent. They said, no, I don't have to pay. Bye, and they get in their brand new car, because money was just flowing during the pandemic to people that were not businesses, but people who got themselves laid off or home in some manner. and took great advantage of the situation. And so our mortgage doesn't go away for those of us that own property. So when they don't pay us, it does great harm, and I'm not sure everybody realizes that. But, you know, about 5 years ago, you would get a GURA, or Section 8, would pay $1,400 for a 4-bedroom home. And now, they'll pay $2,300 for a 4-bedroom home. I don't know about most people, but I work pretty much 7 days a week, try to keep my business going since I retired from the Navy. And I'm not complaining about that, but gosh, for somebody that doesn't do much at all to get $2,300 and live in a house better than I have, I get a little bit disappointed. Have I been, you know, I employ a couple hundred people, they get a salary, they pay their rent, but these other people that have substandard incomes and qualify for these programs live better than my people and myself. And it's something wrong with this equation, and I don't know how we write it, but because that was the federal government. But when we're trying to, yourselves, you know, trying to be everything to everyone, the renters, the tenants, or the landlords, the property owners, and what else. Sometimes you can't be all that. But if you're going to reach out to anybody, the tax incentives to the property owner is the way to go. Tax incentives, you know, we have, once you start giving stuff, then here we go. We've got a temporary business privilege tax that's everything but temporary. And there's a saying that you hear me say, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary classroom. You know, well, there's nothing more permanent than this temporary, you know, extra percent on a BPT. I've been trying since the economy went in the toilet back in 2000 to give my people a pay raise. And when I was about ready to give my people a pay raise, the government gave itself 22% pay raise. Who pays for that? The private sector. So we continue not to pay, give our people a pay raise while the government gives itself a pay raise. So there's some unfairness here. So the property owners, the landlords, they're the ones that someday we'll have to write this system for the people who have invested their meager wealth into this island. I am tired of seeing people leave this island. We're closing schools because so many of our people have left the island. I'm sitting next to the chairman of the Guam Department of Education Board. She says, yeah, well, we've lost 40% of our students, so where'd they go? Well, the families have left. So, you know, it's the realization. I'm sorry, I'm just going on and on. But, you know, we've got this emergency rental assistance program. Now people call up and they want, are you accepting ERA? Or, emergency rental assistance program. Now that's a program that we're setting our property aside for. No, the word emergency is emergency, you know. Well, now we're like, this is what everyday program in their minds until it runs out, and then we find another program to rely on. I'll stop there. Thank you for your time. And, thank you, Senator Quinata, for just opening this discussion. It could get rather lively sometimes.
Sir, can you just state your name and your title?
Monty McDowell. I'm the principal broker for Advanced Management.
Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Senator Esteves, you're recognized. Welcome home.
Thank you, Senator, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Fernando Esteves, Deputy Director of the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority. Primary focus is in public housing and housing strategies related to potential government programs, grants, etc. In response to the committee's inquiries, there were 6 inquiries submitted to GURA, and we provide the following responses for the committee's consideration. Inquiry 1. The committee is keen to investigate policy solutions that support renters who currently lack assistance or do not meet criteria for renters' aid programs or subsidies. How can we extend aid to these renters? Specifically with GURA and our programs being 100% federally funded, Unfortunately, GER's federal funding is restrictive and limited to only eligible program participants. Inquiry 2. What are your thoughts on the potential impact of introducing a tax credit for renters who do not benefit from existing federal or government subsidy programs? How might such a policy affect the real estate market and rental prices in Guam? GERA continues to acknowledge the gap in the community for eligible families who are not covered due to programmatic limitations of our programs and those who may be income ineligible, but struggle with housing stability due to cost factors. I would encourage the committee to carefully review economic data. Direct cash subsidies versus policy-driven incentives to any sector, especially in a boom phase, would likely cause inflation. Real estate in particular generally relies more on market comparables for pricing rather than expense revenue models, as with other industries. This is especially dangerous due to limited stock. Generally speaking, individual subsidies without inflation controls paid directly to the recipients have increased potential to affect market conditions because the market will find a way to capture them. The Overseas Housing Allowance, for example. In contrast, GERA's Section 8 voucher program provides individual subsidies with built-in controls, direct payments to landlords, income-based rent share, and subsidy caps derived from market analysis. Inquiry 3. Could you provide insight or data on
Senator.
the... Yes.
My apologies. We're just going to go question to question, and you already hit number 2.
Oh,
So
I'm
if
sorry, I didn't know the
no
ground
worries,
rules.
No worries. So if we could just ask for the other panel members to add in, or you guys want to have him continue?
We're on
It's a-
inquiry 2?
Yeah,
So
inquiry 2.
I'll hold.
So inquiry 2, he already beat me to the punch. So if you guys want, I can go over inquiry 2. He's a former senator, so he knows how the game rolls, right? So what are your thoughts on the potential impact of introducing a tax credit for renters who do not benefit from the existing federal or government subsidy programs, and how might such a policy affect the real estate market and rental prices in Guam?
Senator, Chairman. Liz's response, Liz Dueñas's response is tax credits may have impact more on landlords than tenants. Tenants may not find tax credits helpful to them. We discussed that a little bit, but again, somehow it has to be structured to where somebody can use it, and then it becomes worthwhile. My personal comment is about the market value. It is a difficult question to answer, but the market value of a rental property is based on their income, basically. It's the income approach to value. Most appraisers will appraise an apartment based on income. So the more income, the lower the expenses, and the fuller the unit is, the higher the value will become. So if a tax incentive or some program helps fill the complex up, or raise the rents, or stabilizes the rents and gets higher occupancy, then you're going to increase values accordingly. That's kind of the answer, I think. It's just it's a factor of the income and expenses is the value in an apartment complex.
Anyone else? Okay. If no one else, we'll proceed to number 3. Could you provide an insight or data on proportion of renters on the island who would potentially benefit from renters tax credit initiative, focusing on those outside of the current subsidy programs? Senator, you can proceed.
Thank you, Senator. As of 2019, Guam had 55,562 housing units, reflecting approximately 1/3 of our population. Owner-occupied and renter-occupied housings were equally proportioned at 41.1%, respectively, for renters at 22,822 and owners at 22,823, accounting for 82.2% of our total inventory, the remainder being vacant. At present, GERA has a maximum capacity to subsidize 3,424 households split between various programs to include public housing, Section 8, Section 202, and community development. That leaves 19,398 rented households unassisted by GURA for permanent housing.
Mr. Chair, can we get a copy of Senator Deputy Director Esteves' statement? And the reason for that, so that we can, when we're talking about it, on my side, I can ask you guys the questions. Okay?
Yes, Mr. Senator Augustine, we'll get that provided to you. Stand by. Would anyone else like to comment on that question?
Sorry, I'm in a talking mood, I guess, today. But Liz's response is, again, the key would be incentives for developers and landlords to provide housing at acceptable rates for the government to subsidize tenants. My response is, I think there was a study done by GURA that the military housing uses a lot that says we are currently 7,000 units short for rentals. That we have a need on Guam right now for 7,000 units, mostly in the low to middle-low income brackets. I think the senator just said from Guam Housing that they are currently doing 3,000, Section 8, I think it was.
Approximately 3,400 housing units, not just Section 8, that's across all of our programs.
Okay, so you could see with 3,400 less the what we need, the 7,000 we need. I've heard projections as high as 11,000. So I feel there definitely is a need for rental programs, especially in the lower end. You have military that kind of takes an upper end of the rental, but the people who are working, they need the $700, $900, $1,100 rentals, and I can't find them anymore, and so there is definitely a need in answer to that question.
Thank you so much. So for the fourth question from a logistical.
I just wanted to, just to support Chris Felix and Liz Duenas' statement that, really realistically, the tax incentive, the tax credit is most beneficial to the landlord who are providing these rental homes for those that need them within that income bracket. So if the a certain individual falls within a certain income bracket, they can come with a voucher that the landlord can use for their tax credit. And then, subsequently, they are able to provide, homes and facilities for these people within that age bracket and within that income bracket.
Thank you, Mr. Suicio. So number 4, from a logistical and administrative perspective, how feasible would it be to implement a policy that provides tax credits to qualifying renters, and what challenges might we face, and how could they be addressed?
Thank you, Senator. It's difficult to determine the impact without a clearer picture of the proposed policy. If the policy is too broad and its administrative burden is beyond capacity, any subsidy would be ripe for fraud, waste, and abuse. In turn, it would likely be inflationary because it'd be out of control. A clearer picture of the proposed policy is needed to identify and mitigate pitfalls. And while it's not included in what I submitted, GURA is an example who, run a voucher program, or any subsidy would be similar, right? There'd have to be controls in place, whether it's ERA, it's Section 8, GURA having the most experience running these with numerous controls in place. For example, with the Housing Assistance Program, our Section 8 program, the money allocated specifically for subsidizing rents is $46.3 million. Of our force employees, that accounts for $2.5 million of that. Management, bookkeeping, and other admin is $1.2 million, which reflects a total of 8% in administrative costs. So we run very lean, right? But to consider even, what the subsidy is going to be, what the intent of the legislature is going to be, and then what the admin burden is going to be as well. 8% again, we have other infrastructure. We've been doing this for a long time, so we have efficiencies in place that can bring that have brought that down to 8%. But likely, I would consider 10 to 12% in administrative costs, if not more, right? Federal standard, the max is about 20% for most grants. That would have to be considered along with the total amount that you're considering for the subsidy. So it's hard to say at this time without knowing more specifics, but it would need a lot of consideration on the front end.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone else?
I think we've already spoken on this issue. How are you going to get the tax credit from a tenant who probably will not be able to use that type of tax credit to the landlord who possibly can, and what that credit would mean to the landlord as far as, what his savings actually is so that he could apply it against the rent. Those are complicated issues, and I leave all that up to you, glorious senators, because I sat down and tried to figure something out, and I'm lost. So it's going to be a difficult task to work a tax credit through a tenant into a landlord.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Felix. Certainly, I think 5 and 6 can be both answered, I think, at the same time. Since I kind of think it's the similar position. So, Senator, if you'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, so for inquiry 5, in addition to our answer in the previous question, as you had mentioned, they're pretty similar. We will add that housing subsidies are potentially heavy commitments to families. The legislature needs to be very clear whether a proposed subsidy is intended as temporary relief or a subsidy that supports permanent housing.
Anyone else want to provide any testimony to 5 and 6? Okay. Other than that, I would like to yield some time to my colleague from GIGO, Senator Still Augustine, if you'd like to speak.
All right. When they talk about tax credit, and Deputy Director Fernandez Esteves is aware of it, that my concern is that I know you all identified the landlord or owner needs to get the tax credit. But I'm looking at the same way how GURA sets up is how public health sets it up. You know how you get the Quest card, the food stamp? Maybe a mechanism needs to be in place, and then maybe, because, I think I read in the newspaper, GURA is not going to be building a bunch of homes. GURA is not planning on building a bunch of homes soon, right? There's kind of like a pause.
If I could elaborate on that, please. Just to be clear for the record. With regard to what the article said was specifically about public housing, which is one program under HUD.
Okay.
We cannot build more than one more public housing unit, right? Because the public housing units come with funding that support its operations. Yes. We're actually at the federal cap, which is 751, known as the Faircloth Amendment. So we have no choice, under HUD program public housing, right. Though, as what's been done in the past, if the legislature wanted us to do housing developments and provided funds, we would be more than happy to do it, but we're at the federal cap for public housing.
Okay, I can understand that, the building part, the funding, but I'm looking at the real estate agencies that have homes, and they have the ability to build homes. I'm trying to figure out a way how it can work with GURA. You know how you want the tax credit so you can fill up the homes. You fill up the homes, then the value goes up, of course. But when you fill up the home and you get the tax credit, I'm not worried about that as the budget guy when we lose the tax credit, because at the end of the day, that person that's got a job has a home to go to. He's going to have to pay for power, water, everything else related to rental. But at least the credit will go to you folks. But I'm trying to figure out a way how it can network with GURA, because GURA won't build, because it comes with money, but you have homes already. So how can we make it work in some fashion where it's a tax credit to you folks, but also they'd have to meet the criteria to get into public housing, so that you get the credit because you're going to have people that are going to qualify. Because right now, if there's not enough homes built, they're going to end up in the market. So at least if they go to the market, they qualify, and then they go to you, and then you get the credit because you have the homes, and then we figure out how we can, so it doesn't blow up on us that we end up turning into a bunch of housing, but I'm gonna bet that there's gonna be some apartments and a bunch of homes that are just sitting, waiting. But if you got renters that qualify, they don't have homes, but they can come to you, then it starts to work its way, where you don't have to worry about going to court, because they would have to meet the criteria of GURA. And somehow, we got to figure out a way how to work out of this, because it's going to be a mess, and it's going to get messier sooner than we think. And I never worry about tax credit, because if you didn't get the money yet, you're not going to get it if you don't give a credit. And there's other ways of generating revenue. It's not about the landlord. Okay, you get a tax credit, great. Somebody's in a home. Somebody's going to, apply for power. Somebody's going to apply for water. Somebody's going to have to pay certain things that are related to their rent. And that has nothing to do with the landlord, because the landlord's going to provide it. And I'm just trying to figure this out, and maybe you guys can join in and try to, we come to some sense of an agreement of how we need to head down this road, because as you read your statement, you're concerned about how the bill's to be written. We need to find a way to give assistance. There's no doubt. We need to find a way. And with you folks here offering that direction, we can sit back down with the oversight chair and come up with a bill that makes sense, that can help the people of Guam. Because if we're looking at by 2027, or 9,500 units, I believe there's half of that on the island, probably sitting idle. Let's put them to use. Let's get them filled, like you mentioned, Mr. Felix. Let's fill those apartments. Let's fill those units. There's people looking for homes, but they can't touch it, because why? The price is so high. So let's figure out a way how we can bring the price down and they can be rented. Yes, Mr. Felix.
Yeah, I really think, you mentioned Felix Camacho. He's the one who uses those federal, Carlos, I'm sorry. Politics, I'm in the right room here. Excuse me. But he's the one who worked the tax credits on more of a federal side. If you could sit there and match, if you could set up a matching thing that offers the same thing, he could put together, or other groups could put together tax credits for lenders and developers, because that's where the best way to get the tax credit is in the project, the development, before it's built. And that's where the tax credits can be applied, and all the rules and regs of who to rent to, following GURA's. That's what Carlos follows, is basically the Section 8 rules and regs. So that would be a great idea, is to sit down and mirror what is offered federally here, and maybe throw a little bit more in. I don't know, but sit with Carlos. Yeah. He's the magic guy.
Senator, no, he is. You know,
he's way past me.
I've worked with Carlos, and he was instrumental with the folks from Atlanta in building Ironwood. I maintain Ironwood. I have a ton of people up there, because the homes is over 750, and they're not just, they're Dedido, Ipa Road, and over by Harvest Baptist. When we first took over the contract, I rented a tour bus and took all my employees. I wanted them to see what we were getting into, and most of them wanted to move into those units because they were quite good. But a lot of the renters, they qualify for some, if not all, of what GURA has to offer because of their income level. They were built with low-interest financing, with the understanding that also low-income people would be the occupants of the facilities, and we have to maintain them to a level that when his inspectors come, and these inspectors, as all realtors know, man, have they increased their standard. They come in and it's hard to pass, and so normally you get 2 inspections at least, because they got a punch list. You go in and do the punch list, and heaven help you if you don't pass the second time, because they can pull your ability to rent it. And when you lose your ability, say for a 4-bedroom at $2,300, that's a big chunk of money. Now you're going out to the open market and those people who get the subsidy through GURA Section 8 do not get it, you know, if you're kicked out of the program as a landlord. So building more ironwood type projects is exactly what Guam needs. Now on the other side of the coin, it's hard to build anything right now because we're building Camp Loss. And so if you're looking to build your house, it's tough. It's tough to find a contractor. And then you say, wow, when I built my house, you know, 20 years ago, I paid $150 a square foot. Ha, those days are gone. Hey, you might start at $400 a square foot and work your way up. You know, it's costs a lot of money if you can get a contractor. These are tough times.
But you know, the reason why contractors are having a problem because of manpower, folks, employees. But see, Department of Labor is looking at, and that's where we have to work with everybody when it comes to construction. But I'm concerned about the currently, you know, other than that, and I'm very familiar with Carlos Camacho. Okay, I've worked with him on many issues. But I'm worried about the current homes that are vacant, apartments that are vacant. I'm looking at working something with GURA where they start working, and then as they're building, as you brought up, Monty, as they're building, then it turns to, because if the federal government doesn't have money to build, well, then let's figure out a way in the government side saying, okay, let's give a tax break because they're going to build these rental homes. And then GURA starts to back them and says, okay, I'm assuming that GURA can get involved in the rental, I guess, you know, per se. I don't know. You might want to speak on that one.
Well, first, Senator, just to share, right, for the record, what our data shows is there aren't vacant rental units. That's the vacant units that we've qualified for. Oftentimes, are either abandoned. More than likely, they're under probate, meaning nobody's using them. Nobody has legal authority to do anything with them. In terms of actual vacant units that are move-in ready or close to move-in ready, they're nearly non-existent. The average turnaround time for our vouchers are 60 to 90 days for them to find a unit. Not so much that they won't take Section 8. Actually, landlords, we have a very good relationship. The program has matured, and they know we enforce rules not only on the landlords, but on our tenants as well. But it's around 90 days, and it's an inventory issue. So I would concede to what they're saying and agree wholeheartedly that our data supports that. And if I may, just because of the discussion that's been having, close out my answer to Inquiry 6, and then just conclude because it ties in with your permission. So with Inquiry 6, any input on successful models from other jurisdictions that have implemented similar assistance, renter's assistance, or renter credit policies. In evaluating state tax credit policies, it's difficult to ascertain how it will be applied to Guam at this time. Guam doesn't have a state income tax. Historically, local taxes for businesses are generally applied to a gross receipts tax, and individual tax credits are paid directly to individuals, which may require a direct appropriation in that case, because you can't credit off an existing tax. Some states have adopted tax credit policies for renters, and they vary. The most common theme are renter credits that focus on specific policy areas as determined by the legislature, such as expanding housing for low-income family, for elderly, peoples with disabilities. And so that, similar to with LIHTC, what they're talking about with the low-income housing tax credit, that focuses on policy areas, right? And there's some room there to say, okay, we want low-income housing tax credits, but we want some units reserved for the elderly. We want some reserved for these. Some of these are going to be Section 8. And so in crafting, right, and the determination by the committee and the legislature, when we say what the policy is going to look like, is that will help us to focus in on, okay, what options we have to do. And that's going to be based on a policy determination made by the legislature and how much money you want to put towards it, right? And then we can get to the work of really trying to figure out what it's going to be, because we have the meat and potatoes to start making kadu, right? Right now, as it stands, as far as more direct subsidies or tax credits for renters, GURA recommends a renter's tax credit policy to families graduating out of our housing programs. The transition from income-eligible public assistance to self-sufficiency is a huge leap. For an unassisted family, this could be equivalent to a loss of approximately $20,000 in net income. This disincentivizes families from seeking income opportunities through education, promotions, working hours, or career changes due to the risk of losing current benefits. Families that graduate out of our housing programs allow us to house new families on our waiting list at a quicker pace. So with our programs, we have caps and limits, right? Most people assume we go through our waiting list just because we're slow. That's not the case. It's a one come off, one goes on. And it's less than a 30-day turnaround to get another family out, right? The lag time that, as I stated, that we mostly experience is once we issue them a new voucher in less than 30 days, provided they submit, their paperwork and everything and not really find the place, it's the average 90-day turnaround for them to find a unit for them to rent. And so, that's the data and what we're seeing with our with the families and our clients that we support. Lastly, I would humbly submit to the committee that direct subsidies do not address the core issue in housing. Simply put, Guam needs more housing units. As of 2019, we projected that Guam needed approximately 9,500 housing units, excluding the military, so not accounting for the military. So that's approximately 3,000 in organic growth, so just population change, which, based on the updated census, may have gone down. But regardless of that, we based on the analysis and the study, we had a pent-up demand of 6,500 units that we needed. Now, pent-up demand covers a couple different categories. Pent-up demand is usually referred to as the couch surfers or the sheltered homeless. And 6,500 of that were just the individuals who would move out if they had the financial means to. Means they don't want to be cooped up. They don't want to be in an intergenerational household. They don't want to be in an overcrowded household. If they had the opportunity or ability to move out, a place they can afford, or unit available, they would do it. So that's pent-up demand. It's a fair prediction that current and projected housing demand means long-run inelastic supply. This means that within a 10-year period, assuming supply is meeting annual organic demand, a downward trend still is not likely within that time period. Downward trend mean a decrease in housing prices. Addressing total demand and a fair market is necessary to balance the supply-demand equilibrium to bring the price down. However, if we fail to address long-term housing shortages now, it will likely result in continued artificial inflation moving forward. It may not be headline breaking, but setting the conditions through policy is critical to chipping away at the core issue. And, we'll allow them to, provide their input, but based on some of our initial analysis, to simply put it, our laws and our policies are not designed for more housing. They're just not. They're antiquated, they're outdated, they're designed for grandpa or mom and dad to pass their house down and for them to build something on it. They're not designed for the type of development that's necessary to meet the housing shortage and the housing demand. And so when I say, look, it might not be headline breaking, but my recommendation is time to crack open the books and see if the legislature and the body here wants more housing, then our laws and policies need to reflect that, because right now they don't. They're very restrictive. They micromanage any type of development. They don't allow for the building code and the professional engineers to resolve issues. And so land that could potentially be developed, and I'm not talking about crazy developments, right, and things people don't want. I'm talking about just regular housing or apartment complexes. We're not allowing the engineers to do it because the policies are just too restrictive. And so much has changed. And basically, housing development is overly legislated, and that's since the 70s and 80s. And rightly so, because a lot of the systems, protections, infrastructure and safety protections, right, with engineering, environmental concerns, Gov Guam, and there weren't enough systems or controls in place to monitor that. So the legislature had put in laws, right, to protect it from a legal perspective, right? But things have changed. And so allowing the market to be the market, allowing developers to develop, and allowing the expertise and the agencies and the engineers and that know the building code inside and out to make the adjustments necessary at their level, well, our belief is that, our strong belief is that's going to spur more development. I'll leave one example. This is a simple model, that one we analyzed. In 2003, GURA built some affordable homes, right, at a project with some funding that we had. They were 900 square foot homes by design, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-carport garage with a washer dryer unit out there and a closet, with a physical footprint of about 2,500 square feet. That included the setbacks as mandated in law. So, assuming you had a 1/4 acre of a lot that was perfectly square, right? We're just assuming. We juxtapose that plan, right? A 900 square foot house by no means is a mansion, but it's an affordable house. It's reasonable, and you can raise a family there. Had the law been different, and had there been flexibility, on that same 1/4 acre lot, we could have put 4 of these homes, assuming it was perfectly square, or 3, depending on the topography and all of that, right? The truth of the matter is that there is, from a basic mathematical analysis, unless it's heavily subsidized, it's not that there's no market for affordable housing or attainable units. It's that it's an impossible market. No, there's nobody who's going to go into it. Anybody who would go into it will lose money. That's guaranteed. The numbers just don't add up. And so we have a couple choices. We can reduce the overall cost by allowing the policies to make that. So for that same example, sorry, I'm getting off voice. If GURA were a private developer, and with that same 1/4 acre lot, we're able to put 4 houses, there's a much higher likelihood we would have, at least broke even and made our money back, right? As an example. But if you have to, and with the increase in land value, if you have to pay for the lot, no one's going to put an affordable home on a 1/4 acre lot, right? Because you're going to lose money. A 900 square foot home on a 1/4 acre lot. And so right now, the money is anywhere where there's subsidies, whether that's a GURA subsidy to rent a home, or overseas housing allowance, or anything else other than an attainable home for a family that needs it. And so that's just one example of, we need to look at the policies and revisit them and say, is this still current, right? If that lot had been connected to sewer, then you could put 10 houses, you could put an apartment complex. It wouldn't matter to EPA if it had sewer. The density, is relative at that point. But now we run into an opposite situation environmentally, that if you take a house that's on a septic, that's designed for a family of 4 or a family of 5, let's say 3-bedroom, and now you have 10, 12 people in that house, now you have that opposite effect, right? The septic tank is designed for the size of the home. I'm sure they can attest to that, right? They designed that, the leaching field and everything. There's engineering that goes to that. So overcrowding has its own environmental concerns, as well as the socioeconomic concerns and risk associated with that type of housing insecurity. So to sum it all up, in simplest terms, if we have money, if there is money that, and there's a determination to aid in housing affordability and start addressing the long-term issue of housing, then it needs to go to more inventory in one way or another. And so whether that's going to be tax incentives to developers to develop with perhaps a deed restricted type policy, meaning similar to LIHTC, right? Hey, we're going to give you these tax credits, but that you have an affordability of 15 years, of 30 years. You have to keep it affordable. A percentage of your units have to be affordable to these folks. So there are a lot of options there, and there are probably more successful models for development type tax credits. It's seen with other states. The individual or direct subsidies, whether to the landlord or to the individual, is very much administrative heavy. And so, could result in a net loss of funds that support the people, because you have to take on that administrative burden.
But when you mention that, to give them the credit, like for example, you folks are the developer Who would manage, who would qualify? Would Gura be able to do this?
Well, that's up to the legislature. I mean, it's your, it's your tax credit.
But Senator Stevens, Deputy Director, I'm trying to lead it to that Gura is willing to do this because we can create, and you know that, we can create any possible bill, but it's got to be able to flow correctly. We create the bill, we say, okay, we're going to give you the tax credit, it's good for 15 years or even 20 years, but it also ends if you don't qualify. And the only one that's going to determine the tenant to go there would be Gura to meet that qualification. You know what I mean? So that it flows. But I just wanted to make sure that would Gura be willing, because writing the bill would be, I believe it's not that hard. And you know where I'm coming from, Senator. Okay? It's not that hard. It's just we got to make sure that the working parts, everybody's working together for the same goal. Because at the end of the day, Monty's going to be like, okay, where we're going to go and how we're going to do this. And that's where I'm coming up, is that let's make sure we're all willing to talk to each other and all agree to it so that when we write the bill, it's clear and it's easier to sell. Because if I'll call Carlos and say, Carlos, what do you got out there other than Ironwood? What developers you got there? And he's probably going to tell me, I can get a bunch of developers. I can get a bunch of people. But it takes time to build.
There is actually a bill that we haven't done much entertainment, but Senator Taitagui put a bill out over a year ago, asked us to review it, and we didn't think it was written very well, but it was really tax incentives to the developer, the construction companies, and the material suppliers. And I personally thought, oh boy, here we go. We're going to have to start a new agency to oversee the implementation of the material supplier, the contractor, the landlord. Okay, we approve it. We got to go make sure they're doing what they say they're going to do. And I envision, here we go, another Chamorro Land Trust, and
that's why I'm asking, if Gura's willing to get involved in it, then a lot of the management, because they do this is their backyard. If they get involved and you're a developer and you say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're willing to do this. And they say, okay, these are the standards you must meet. You're spending all the money, but they're willing to manage to help you get your tenants in there because they got a bunch of tenants. They got a waiting list. And then things start to work. Other than, like you're saying, create another agency. We don't need to do there's agencies that can do this. They do this for a living. And if we can make it work, then it just flows. That's what I'm after. And I know where you're coming from. You're worried about, here we go now, adding more layers to what was supposed to be simple. And that's what I'm trying to. Huh?
Let's create some more stuff. And we employ some people.
And that's what I won't support.
And then our party gets it.
Well, I would disagree. I think based on our audits and our operations and our...
I'm not talking about Gura.
Okay.
I'm talking about setting up a brand new agency to oversee it.
As far as tax credit goes, Senator, when I discuss a lot of it's going to depend on, again, what you want. And that's what I'm saying is we'll do what we need to do to support. Housing means a lot to us. And we remain on our position that the solution actually is not more subsidies to low-cost housing. Granted, we don't have enough. But in addition to more units, we cannot forget about the middle-class folks, right? Because as the theory goes, the housing compression, when there are not enough units, the ones who have the least amount of means are pushed out. So those with middle-class incomes or more means are going to price out those affordable units at 900, at 800, 1200, wherever they may be. And all the folks with less means ends up on our doorstep, and we have limited amount of resources. And so it's not so much about just subsidizing those of the lowest end. Addressing the core problem is addressing housing, the housing needs and housing shortages, and attainability, not affordability, for everybody, particularly the middle class income folks. And so that's the long-term goal we want to get to. So when I say crafting a policy, right, or we can work together, it's whatever direction you want to go. You guys would be the ones to determine what the eligibility, HUD determines in some programs what the eligibility level is, but that's their determination. If you guys are the ones paying for it, if Gov Guam and the government of Guam and taxpayers are the ones paying for it, you design it however you want. If you want 80% of the area median income, 90%, 100%, just straight down the middle and below, you know, that's up for you guys to target. And then we can work around that based on what your policy initiative is. Now, if we could, or if your intent was that we just follow HUD's guidance and mimic it, we can do that as well. But I just want to be clear that it's really up to the legislature with what you guys decide to fund and what direction you want to go. Now, I will add for housekeeping's sake, because we're 100% federally funded, I cannot use the time paid for the employees federally funded for these projects. That's not saying I need to go out and create a new agency or hire people. It just means if I'm going to take time away from their hours, I can't bill that to the federal government. It's what's called a direct expense, right? So if I take my engineer, for example, and I said, hey, you're going to work on this development, the scope of work for this plan, that time, that hour by hour has to be allocated and have its own funding source. So it's not to say we cannot support. I'm saying there's an administrative cost that the federal government cannot be burdened with on the cost principles under 2 CFR 200 and our grant requirements. And so we're happy to help however we can. I don't even think it's going to be a significant burden, administrative burden. I'm just saying we cannot, without any financial support, apply our federal funds and the funds that fund our employees to these initiatives.
Well, I think
It'd be like a cost share.
And that I can agree with. I can see that. I can see the government. Now, a lot of people seem to forget that just because the government raises and they got a big budget, the money comes from the people of Guam. It comes from all you folks. And when we talk about middle income, we're talking about, but other than taxpayers, but we're talking I would say majority of the senators are middle income. You look at what we get a year. We're not making no $80, $90, $100,000 a year. We're at the 55 bracket. And for anybody that's in middle income, we need to help as many as possible. That's my attitude. We need to help everybody or as many as possible because there's certain groups, Daddy, if you make over 100,000, really you need rental assistance? Come on, we need a little bit lower, a lot lower. And then we figure that out, and then when you talk about cost sharing, I think the government needs to be able to do this because the government needs to be able to work with the federal government and with folks like you, the real estate agent. We need to work together somehow and not build another agency. I don't believe in building another agency. Yes, Monty.
If I could interject, you're right about that. You can't mix the federal. I have employees that work for the federal government during the day and work, say they go to FHP, they go to GPO or whatever. I pay multiple pay scales to the same person, but I have records of it. It's just the way it is. Probably you haven't had to do it, but it's doable. There's no problem. You know, there's something here that I think needs to be brought up, and I'm just the guy to do it. If you have a program, you'll have people that know how to manipulate it, to work in their favor. And we have an employee shortage on this island in great numbers. That's why we got all these H-2 workers now. And so I see people going in to qualify for, say, Section 8, and they say, oh, with the husband and wife are working, their kids are in child development center, a daycare service being paid for by a block grant. And so they say, well, with your income base, we'll pay half, you pay half. Then they do the math, and they say, well, if my wife stops working, we get the whole thing paid. So now the wife is not part of the employee base of Guam because she's home, and they don't need the child development center anymore. She can take care of the kids herself. And so if they were subsidizing any of that, and so there's this ramification. We have employees. You know, when you have a couple hundred employees, it's very interesting. I want to give you a pay raise because of your performance and give you more responsibility. The boss, I want more responsibility, but only if you don't give me a pay raise. Why? Because my subsidy for WIC program, for food stamps, and for my housing allowance will be negatively affected. So just don't give it to me. I'll take the pay raise. I mean, I'll take the additional responsibility. We come up with programs and people know how to figure out how to manipulate them. And it's sad.
Or unreported cash payments.
Yes,
Because
and exactly what you're saying, because like on the food stamp, the Quest, the amount has gone up. And, you know, at one point, I know Senator Roy wanted to do this recently. He wants to raise the do the pay raise, okay, for outside the market, not the GovGuam, outside the market. But I advise him that let's watch what the market trends, what Quest is giving, what Gurus, what other subsidies they're getting, because if you start hurting them, they'll say, I don't want a pay raise. Exactly what your folks are saying. Give me the job. Don't give me the money because I need to maintain my Quest. I need to maintain my housing. But see, if we can turn around, because we're talking about housing, well, let's figure out a way now how to help the housing development. That's my goal. If we can help the housing development, then we're moving in a direction where it needs to go. Because right now, Guru is willing to help, but we got to figure out a way how to carve out the funds so that it covers their expense. Then the rest will be all on the developers. I know you real estate people, you guys got land out there. You're trying to find buyers. Well, how about if you turn it around and get a developer, build a home or build apartments or a bunch of homes, and it'll be specifically to that income bracket. And then the other developers, the other development is for another bracket, but still maintain the tax incentive. I mean, the tax breaks. I'm willing to do that because at the end of the day, you get a break today, but everything that follows goes right into the revenue base. This is already covered. I'm not worried about the developer because they're going to get the break.
You could consider with many of the contractors that have folks in for the military buildup, right? I'm talking some of the biggest, big contractors with a lot of resources.
Yes.
Right? And if you were looking at a tax credit policy, one available tax is the GRT that they pay on even with their federal project,
Yep.
right? So, right there is kind of a potential low-hanging fruit. If you need the development and they have the workers, whether there's a delay in their contract or there's something they can get involved in, they're liable to pay the GRT just as every other local business is on Guam, and that might be one potential route.
Yes, well, whenever I look at tax credit, I'm looking at GRT to begin with.
Yeah, and
Because everything else will fall in place.
Yeah, and that's what we could see too, because individual tax credit paid out to an individual, since we don't have a state income tax, is basically just a check you're going to write them directly and give that back.
No, I wouldn't want to give individuals.
Yeah.
When we're talking development, strictly to the owners, to the developers, build it, and let's stretch it out so that the program doesn't die tomorrow. Because Monday be like, where's the units I'm supposed to be part of? But anyway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm not sure, no matter how much incentive you have, if we got the industrial base to build. The H-2 workers are coming in because the NDAA allows the people who are working in the military facilities to bring them in. So you got big guys like Black Construction, got a few thousand H-2 workers. They used to profess that they didn't have a single H-2 worker. They're going to hire everybody on. Once they exhausted the resource of Guam, and they won those bids, they had no choice but to bring in guest labor for the period of the contract, and then you send them back. So there just isn't anybody to do it. You can write that compelling statement that, yes, we're building something, a housing facility in Talafofo, but collaterally, it affects the buildup, and sometimes you can get by with special disposition to bring in H-2 workers. Some people have been very classy at coming up with these scenarios and getting by with it, but that's not a given. So I'm just afraid that we could come up with this, but that the buildup will end someday. And those people we're training at the Trades Academy at GCC to be craft workers will be available, and we can start hopefully getting back to building the resources we need for the 11,000, 9,000, whatever it's needed. And let's get the people to stop leaving Guam.
just real quick for the record, the NDAA allows, housing is considered critical military development, not just for military construction. People don't know that. You can bring H-2B workers to build housing. The issue that is the workforce housing, is where are they going to put them? There have been some reports of a lot of these, and additionally, people aren't aware of this, these military contractors, a lot of times from off island, buying up apartment complexes and kicking everybody out to put their workers in. And that is a challenge in itself, right? And so we need more workers. DoD needs more workers. We need more workers. We can have the workers to build housing because it's allowed under the NDAA, but now we don't have workforce housing. You know, that's one policy area that can also be looked for as well, right? Is way back then, before anything was going and we had a lot of construction, the legislature, and it was this body, not this session, but this body that determined, we don't know how much M1 there is out there, how much light industrial, but we're just going to say they can only live on light industrial, right? Those are the types of policies that the legislature, without any cost to anybody, I would recommend start looking at, and how to address all of the cumulative issues that we have that you know, you guys are getting feedback on.
We have a bill in that with Senator Quinata, that allows us to build in the M1 zone, because that's the law, but it takes it in a position where it doesn't take 1 year permission to get it. It takes 1 week. We just need to get that bill. It got heard, but like a lot of bills, and you were here.
Yeah,
we got to get it out of the hopper.
It's stuck in purgatory.
But you know, I mean, those for the large contractors, you're talking potentially some smaller size contractors who can bring in maybe 10 H-2B and just specifically work on housing, right? They may not own M1. They may not have access to it. There's such a limited supply of M1, and they may not be able to construct a barracks, but they can, you know, rent units at an apartment complex or construct something on their agricultural land, you know, provided it meets the specifications.
Before I forget what I was going to say, with regard to renters insurance or renters assistance, I think what we've identified through this discussion is really the area of great need are those, as Senator mentioned, those that have graduated out of the GURA type programs. So if somehow this body can craft a bill or some kind of legislation to address, you know, that specific need, those people and those income levels, and use the expertise and the parameters already established by the GURA personnel to administer that. And of course, the legislature would need to provide the funding source for those additional employees, or, you know, to take care of that administrative expense. I think that's the greatest need, and I think that that's where we can really, you know, to craft some kind of legislation for the renters assistance, is to address those people in that niche that are graduating out of the GORA program, that are in the middle class, you know, as you previously mentioned, that really don't qualify for any other assistance. They're the ones that are really being squeezed. And if somehow that incentive can go directly to the landlord, you know, use the parameters and, you know, use the rules and regulations that have already been established. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to take those parameters and up it a little bit so that those people in that echelon can qualify.
Thank you so much. That's definitely the reason we're here today. So just to follow up on Senator Esteves' statements earlier, are there any renters with Section 8 vouchers who are having difficulty finding landlord that will accept them?
There are some of those instances. You know, I'm not going to beat around the bush. There are landlords that say, I don't rent to anybody but military, right? Chasing the top dollar. That's definitely been reported numerous times. They oftentimes won't even get a showing. They won't even entertain the call. But like I said, we've done a lot to, you know, improve the tenant, GURA, and landlord relationship, and we actually have more interest from landlords because of the stability of GURA. So I wouldn't say we have a huge problem. There are some, you know, landlords, of course, there is a concern because sometimes it's linked to potential housing discrimination, and we're always on watch for that. But But it's really an inventory issue, Senator. That's the challenge that we're having. I mean, you know, most landlords are fine. All money is green to them, right? But it really is an inventory issue. That is the challenge.
Thank you so much. What is the size of the wait list, or do you have a rough estimate on what the wait list is for general housing programs?
Every
I guess a whole list.
yeah, I'll send it, but maybe just so people understand the wait list, right? Each program will have its own wait list, right? Section 8 has their main HCV, then each of their special vouchers has their own wait list. Public housing has their own wait list, but it's by unit size, right? Because every unit is sized appropriately to the household. So there'll be a wait list for a 1-bedroom, there'll be a wait list for a 2-bedroom, there's a wait list for Guma Tranquilidad elderly. So it's all dependent on eligibility. And what we try to do is if there's a family in need, we try to put them on every wait list that they qualify for. But as I've stated with all of our programs, we can only get a new family in once somebody comes off. And whether that's they graduate out because of income eligibility, they get terminated for violating the rules, or, you know, that's likely the case. Or, you know, yeah, mostly it's I don't want to say mostly it's the rules, but it'll be really one of those two categories. They graduate out, or they break the rules and they're terminated from the program. But as far as HUD's concerned, they consider it permanent housing, right? But there are families, and we have a program called FSS, Family Self-Sufficiency, that we help families transition out, and we've had a lot of success stories, right? Of families becoming self-sufficient coming out of the program. So there is a desire, and we think and believe there's a greater desire for it. But as I mentioned, the cumulative benefit that these families, these eligible families have, not just with GURA and our housing, is probably about 20,000. And so when you consider that gap, if you're a family of 4, you're making roughly 43,000, and you're still in that eligibility zone, and then, you know, next year you're making only 3,000 more, 1,000 more, or if you, in consideration for $1 pay raise, that comes out to about 2,500. That puts them out of the program, and they go from $43,000 a year earner with 20,000 in subsidies, making $2,000 more, but now they lose their negative 20,000 because they don't qualify for anything anymore. And that's the biggest gap that everyone's trying to figure out, not just on Guam, on how to resolve that, right? How do we make it less scary for them to get that education, go for that promotion, get that extra income, have a second person in the household working if they're able to? So it's a pretty big jump.
Why don't we just work on the tax breaks, and then that will ease a lot of stuff. And that's what I want to focus on.
Thank you, Senators. One more question for GURA. Does GURA know of any federal programs where federal funds could be used to refurbish such properties or unoccupied housing units to meet the housing standards for your programs, or possibly increase inventory?
Absolutely. We've been doing that with our community development block grant program. We buy units to preserve for affordable rentals, and of course refurbish them. Our home program is also able to do that as well. However, they have a lower income level eligibility requirement. So CDBG goes to low to moderate income, so up to the AMI, and then home is like 30%, off the top of my head, I believe about 40% of the area median income. But yes, we have 2 programs, and they're constantly working.
Is that the one that's at the airport on the road? I mean, I'm seeing a lot of development there. A lot of the homes there are being refurbished.
No,
Okay,
those are privately owned.
I just thought I'd check because they look quite nice. They're being cleaned up. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anything further on the agenda. If anyone would like to add anything.
You know, there was a comment about landlords and not desiring to have people in the category that they're servicing. And I would tell you, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, the Section 8 tenant was the tenant of last resort, basically. And we had a real problem with them coming in and devastating our properties. And there was policies, I believe, in place that we could go and claim back to Gura. It was what we wanted. We just come in and rent and behave yourself and don't tear up our property. Now, this is the new and improved Gura, you know, and the way they manage it and manage the tenants, that you get into Section 810, it's not a bad thing. The money's good, the oversight by Gura is good. If you have a problem, they'll come running. They hold us to a much higher standard before. Now the inspectors come in and they inspect, and you better meet it or you won't be eligible for it. That's fine. We should. Everything in our unit when we rent it should work properly. And when they come in, they'll put in the discrepancy like a fire alarm. It's the tenant's responsibility to replace the batteries in a fire alarm. So they'll put fire alarm needs batteries, and they'll put T next to it. It means it's tenant's responsibility. And then L next to it means it's the landlord's responsibility. The system works a lot better now than it did years ago, from my standpoint. I assume you guys agree that it's a much improved Gura. We enjoy working with them. You know, if you're having a bad day and they give you this big list of discrepancies, it's pretty frustrating. But yeah, it is what it is. Just fix it and you won't have a problem.
Okay, thank you so much. All of that information is duly noted. If there are no further discussions, the committee appreciates your participation today in today's informational briefing hearing. I commend you all today and thank you for your participation and contributions to the critical information needed to shape an outcome of this process of possible policies and legislation. I urge you to continue to share your invaluable insights and the feedback to help us make more informed decisions. Together we can assure that this important matter serves the best interest of all our people. It is now 11:21, and that concludes today's informational hearing, and we are adjourned at 11:21. Thank you, Sidus Masi, and God bless.